very long and
a bit too condensed. So, well, that's great. Yeah. And thank you again.
Yeah, so I'll switch out. Nice meeting you, Mr. Hicks. And
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So
we can start? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So, Gaby, thanks very much for this interview with New Europeans, and congratulations on your very active job in the European Parliament. So I've got a few questions to ask you on behalf of New Europeans. The first one, of course, is on the upcoming conference on the future of Europe, which is a unique opportunity for the European Union to reaffirm a fundamentally more ambitious policy agenda and corresponding decision-making structure. So what, in your opinion, are the strategic challenges involved, and how can the European Parliament assert its legitimate role?
I think the first is that this conference that was promised to the European Parliament before the election of Madame von der Leyen as President of the Commission is a very timely initiative. I think even if people had doubts, do we really need such a conference on the future of Europe? I think after Corona and the pandemic, a lot of people realized that it's more necessary than ever that we really get our things together and are again capable to act. And that, for example, with a pandemic like this and such a health crisis, we would have been much better off if we would have had more European competences in this area to act. Or if you look at the border closures, incredible some years ago that something like this would happen. And that millions of workers that have their right for free movement, the cross-border workers, 1.5 million, cannot reach their job anymore. And that's it, from one day to another. Yeah. So I think it's very important, but I also hope that we will have enough pressure of parliamentarians, of civil society, to start a real meaningful conference on the future of Europe. I fear a little bit now that with Corona that they want to downshift the ambitions. And it will need a lot of dedicated people to act so that we in the end will still have a meaningful and very inclusive conference.
In this context, how can the EU democratic deficit be more convincingly addressed and a more authentic citizens' Europe be forged? And what specific role would you see for civil society?
I mean, for how long are we fighting for more democracy in Europe? Since many, many years. I mean, if you look only at the economic governance, since 10 years, we are discussing how we can here address the democratic deficit and make the economic governance more democratic and also more social, but it did not happen. And if you look at the whole picture, you can see that people are more and more worried that in these special times with, on one hand, the Trumps and Putins and China on the rise, that Europe is the opportunity to set a different example, but also that the European Union needs more democratic accountability. I mean, we are the only parliament that doesn't have the right of initiative. So there is a lot to do to make Europe more democratic. And the conference on the future of Europe is one of the opportunities to address it, because I think we want a Europe that is more capable to act. And to have that, I think it also needs to be more democratic, and the citizens have to get more involved. And I see here a strong role for civil society and for citizens to be directly involved. To say it's not a faraway Europe somewhere, some bureaucrats working in Brussels or Strasbourg, but that the European project is an essential project that also wants to involve the citizens and civil society in this project and in the design of this project. I mean, if you discuss the economic governance, you would need a stronger role there of social partners, but also of civil society organizations in the design of the European semester, for example.
Mm-hmm. Good.
And this is our big opportunity, I think, with the new proposal after Corona on the recovery program, to use this as an opportunity to fully democratize the European semester, for example, would be an important step for a more democratic Europe.
Good, thanks. You mentioned the right of initiative that Parliament should really exercise, and of course you have been publicly campaigning for a change to Article 255 of the treaty to enable the Parliament to exercise the full right of initiative. And you've also been campaigning for a more dedicated use of qualified majority voting in Council. How do you think both major proposals, what are their chances of success in the conference, and how much momentum is there behind them in the run-up to the conference?
I think for many people and citizens, when I talk in my constituency, they can see that with 27 member states in the core European policy areas, migration, asylum, economic governance, etc., that as long as you have unanimous decisions, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. There's too much divergence, and it's always that a lot of member states use certain decisions as bargaining chips for others. And that we really need to get rid of this and this opportunity to block the capacity to act. And therefore, I think, because people still believe in Europe, but they also want to see that it can deliver. And I think here this is something which will have a lot of support, I think. And I also see in many member states also that they say we need to get rid of the beautiful Einstimmigkeit and rather really see that we get a qualified majority voting in all areas. In all areas.
So you would apply it across the board.
I would apply it across the board.
Would be
for me, it's a much better alternative to having ideas like a core Europe or whatever, because I think these are the two things in the medium or long run. Either you try with 27 and then you have qualified majority voting, or in the end you have a sort of core Europe in certain areas if you don't come together anymore. And I mean, imagine 10 years ago, if someone would have told you that the European Union would do a regulation on the question of the refugees and the quotas, and it would be agreed in the council, everything, but then afterwards certain member states would say, no, we are not doing it. Mm-hmm. Imagine also that this takes place in other policy areas.
Could you imagine qualified majority voting working on fiscal matters, for instance? Because that's a rather sensitive area, isn't it?
As long as we have anonymity here, nothing will move in terms of tax policies. Yeah. Nothing. Yeah. I mean, we watch it and we see the development over the last decade and nothing moved. Mm-hmm. Really, I mean, we have these beautiful declarations and we should, but I think no, it will be very important to come to qualified majority, and then also to make sure that on the core issues they again really try to find a consensus, and in the end at least identify a majority for it, and the rest then, like in any democracy, has to accept that it's a majority decision.
Well, regarding social Europe and the implementation of the European social pillar, or pillar of social rights, what concrete measures would you envisage putting into, or must be put into action now, in your opinion?
I mean, we did fight very, very much for the European pillar of social rights. And the big promise in there is that now that we have this agreement on the pillar, we will have concrete projects how to implement these guidelines. And for me, one of the core projects in the next 2 years and already in the upcoming German presidency is the framework on minimum wages. Mm-hmm. And for me here, to address the wage divergence in Europe, the wage inequalities, and make sure that in every European country we have a minimum wage where you can have a decent living. And for me, that's the 60% median wage, national median wage, as the reference for this project. And at the same time, on one hand, lifting the minimum wages, because only 2 countries so far achieved the 60% median, national median wage in their minimum wages. That's France and Portugal. All other countries are not, or do not have sufficient high minimum wages. But at the same time, I think also strengthening collective bargaining, for example, in the European semester, and have this as a dual approach, for me, would be a very important project also to regain trust of workers.
That's interesting that you connect both together, because in the we've had before, of course, there was always a concentration in previous projects on minimum income. And the idea of a minimum wage was somehow taboo because that had to be left to collective bargaining. From what I can make out, what you're saying is that the two actually are mutually strengthening, and
absolutely
they go together. So that could be a joint approach, both from a political point of view, but also from presumably the social partners. So, yeah. And what about the other key proposal that I've read about recently from the Commission on an unemployment benefit reinsurance scheme, which is again part of a sort of fiscal transfer in a way, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I mean, I think it was Laszlo Andor already, which is already some time ago that came up with a proposal like this in the Commission when he was commissioner. We are discussing it since then, and I think also here in the crisis, how would we have been better off if we already would have had such an instrument on European level? Because what we have now, sure, the short-term instrument is just a step into this direction. But it is only a helpful instrument for people that still are in work. But we have a growing unemployment. We have a really growing, fast-growing unemployment of young people. And we really need to address this fast.
Yeah.
And when I read, just in Germany, when I read how many big companies are going to lay off thousands of people, I can already see that the next months and years will be tough, will not be easy. And I think here we need a more solidarity and more solidaric tools to help people, because they don't want to see that we are able to save the banks, but not the people, with rising unemployment. And I think we would have been much better off in this crisis if we would have had it already. And instead of discussing it for 10 years and not moving, this is the problem of Europe, is in the end to get the act together and a sufficient number of member states to really go for reforms. They just want to muddle through and go back to this sort of only short-term policy approach. Because big reforms, you also have to convince not only other member states, you have to find majorities in the European Parliament, in the national parliaments, you have to discuss with citizens, but I think it's worth it. And I think now with this conference on the future of Europe, it might be our last opportunity for change.
I must say I'm rather surprised that you're going for, not surprised, but pleasantly surprised in a way that you're going strongly for a one-speed Europe and a cohesive Europe, a Europe of solidarity based on qualified majority voting, the full use of initiative by the European Parliament. That's a big quantum leap. Do you think there's really enough strength behind these proposals for them to succeed? I mean, will there not be resistance in certain areas that from certain member states that could put heed to this great leap forward?
If you would leave it to the European Council, nothing would move. I mean, look what is happening at the moment in all of the key areas. That's the problem. And therefore, I think it's a good step to involve the citizens and to listen to them. What do they have to say? Where do they see changes? And I think they're not so much interested in institutional debates, but when they see that with different institutional ways, we can achieve much more for them. I mean, the original promise is not to have beautiful institutions, but the original promise of Europe is that they are able to deliver better living and working conditions for the citizens. And this is, I think, where we have to come back to. And there I see a momentum, because what we saw in the last European elections is that there is a high interest in the European Union. There's also a lot of criticism that it doesn't work well, but to translate this in the necessary changes to improve it. Because I think many people understood, if we continue like this, with this muddling through, without a vision for the future, this project might fail, really. We have seen how fast something like the Brexit can develop in a country, and in times of fake news and everything. But I think this is why we need a clear vision for the future. What do we want the European Union for? On what key areas should it deliver? And to discuss this together with the citizens, I think is a great opportunity. We should not miss that. And also with civil society organizations.
It's often mentioned nowadays as sort of one of these fashionable phrases, the Hamilton moment. Are we?
I wish it would
maybe
be.
to do with the Hamilton musical. I don't know, but more seriously, do you think a social union can be achieved without fiscal union? Is this really the moment for a Hamilton moment and to really have a more unified approach to all fundamental policies?
I see it as a prelude to a Hamilton moment. I think if you look at this idea with the European Recovery Program and the MFF and the own resources, I think this can be a prelude to a Hamilton moment, to say, and that we realize that what projects we could do if we would achieve this. And with a fairer taxation, for example, be the digital tax or other ideas that are on the table, and to directly finance with this important project that deliver for citizens in terms of a fairer mobility, in terms of social projects or cohesion projects.
And what about new competences for the EU? And for example, the idea of a European health union is now obviously discussed because of the coronavirus and other matters. Do you envisage new competences of that sort for the EU?
You know, I'm already since some time in European policies, and I remembered in the pandemic, I remembered the debates in the last European Convention. And there was this debate about better competences for pandemias, and it was in the draft proposal for a European constitution, which in the end didn't materialize. And here again, it's a bit like with the European unemployment scheme. How much better would we have been off, could address together this pandemia in one go? We would have had a strategy, a European strategy, how to stop the virus, and not individual member states that don't even communicate with each other, just cross their borders and think that's it, that helps them, and don't even let medical goods pass to another country for some time. And now mobilizing the resources that we need, what's the English word? A cure for the pandemia.
Yes. And a more comprehensive European approach.
Yeah. So I think, yes, I think we should take the opportunity now to do it.
Yeah. You've talked.
I don't mean that all competences in the health area, but really focus where we have a real added value in addressing, for example, such a pandemia. Or if we look at the standards, I mean, what we saw also in this crisis, that with austerity policy of the last years, the health system in many member states were in big problems. And we need to address this for the future, to not let this happen again, and to see that we need social investment and also more investment in health, for example, in hospitals.
And cross-border health issues as well.
Yeah.
And we've seen just recently between Alsace and Germany, how initially there wasn't very much cross-border cooperation, but then there was a will, and it worked, and there was a lot of very positive cooperation between France and Germany in treating, I think, especially French. I guess that sort of thing could be.
Yeah, I think it was good that after the first shock of a revival of national sort of reactions, that then I think people were also a bit shocked. How could this happen like this? And then to see that you cannot just close your borders, but that if you have capacity on one side of the border to offer it and help, I mean, that's this moment of solidarity that creates Europe, or supports it, or shows to citizens that we are in this together.
We've talked quite a lot about citizens, rightly so, in this interview, and of course it's a subject close to your and to my heart. If I may raise the question, because I felt it very personally as a British citizen. I'm also an Italian citizen, I'm pleased to say, but as a British citizen, after Brexit, I and many others suddenly lost our inalienable European citizens status. And there have been some proposals in parliaments to try and restore this on a voluntary basis, that those who by no fault of their own lose their European citizenship, could they not be entitled, or could they not be able to have it restored on a voluntary basis, which would of course require treaty change. What are your feelings about this? I know it's obviously a very sensitive area, but so is the idea of having rights that are permanent and not just subject to your nationality.
Yeah, I think the Brexit case is a special case. It's the first time that we ever experience something like this. And what we could already see, and I did find this very interesting, we could see it in Belgium, but also in Germany, that a lot of people that had an opportunity like you to have the British and the Italian nationality took their opportunity and were not so much emotionally linked to say staying British. And I thought this is also a success of Europe already, that people feel European and not just German or British or French or whatever. I think it will be very at the moment, I think it's more important to see that we can save the rights of one hand, the Europeans in the UK,
of course,
and also from the other side, and hope that there will still be an agreement. I have more and more doubts that Johnson really wants an agreement to safeguard citizens' rights on both sides, because it affects millions of people. I mean, their life, their plans, everything. And then with the other question, the inalienable, I haven't thought enough about this, and I would have more questions to you to discuss it than to have proper answers. Also because referring it then in general.
Yeah.
You know, not just to the Brexit experience here, and what would that mean?
Yeah, of course. I mean, for me, I was very proud. I'm still very proud and lucky to be a European citizen. But lots of people who thought they were European citizens have suddenly lost that status, and it could happen again. And I think we always thought that it was a permanent right and obligation, and that suddenly it was lost for many people was a great shock, and it could even be a shock to the system of Europe itself, or United Europe itself, if somehow your citizenship is not that strong. Of course, and in New Europeans, we are pushing as well for securing the rights of EU citizens who remain resident in Britain to retain their proper rights as they had before Brexit, and of course the two go together. But this whole concept of citizenship maybe needs to be looked at again. Up until now, European citizenship has been to some degree symbolic, but in other ways, of course, very, very meaningful, free movement.
Yeah, but here we had a shock too with the crisis. I am looking on my watch because I have to leave to another meeting, but I think this is something to discuss, is that for the first time, hundreds of thousands of citizens realized that they have theoretically the right of free movement, but they could not. There was no one to really help them.
Yeah.
And it was for the first time that they said, okay, theoretically I have the right, but in my everyday life I'm now stopped, I'm stuck here. And I think this will have implications for the future. A lot of them. I think this is something we really have to work on. Yeah. In the future.
Gaby, you've given me more than the time that we thought we would have, and I put more questions to you than I thought. So I'm really, really grateful. It's nice to see you.
But I have to run, unfortunately.
And, well, thank you very much. I'm sure we'll be in touch in June.
We'll keep in touch. Yes.
And thank you to Susan as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.